From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio's How Stuff Works.
Hello and welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We are joined as always with our super producer Paul, Mission Control Deccan. Most importantly, you are here, and that makes this stuff they don't want you to know. We get a lot of letters. We've received a lot of correspondences over the years, and occasionally people have written to us and said something like, gee, thanks, fellas. Now I can't sleep at night, right? Or,
yeah, that's pretty common, actually.
Yeah, stayed up till 5 a.m. on one rabbit hole or another.
And conversely, we get messages every once in a while that say, wow, you guys really helped me fall right to sleep.
I love that one.
Also true.
5 stars. Whenever I can't sleep, I turn on stuff they don't want you to know. Today's episode hinges on a couple of things that may seem on the offset unrelated, but they're very much related. We're talking about insomnia, the physical phenomenon that people encounter. We're talking about true crime, unsolved murders in a way that gets dark very, very quickly. And we're talking about a show, Monster Presents Insomniac. This is out now. It's available now. And please listen to our show first because we have a special guest today, a longtime friend of the show, personal friend of ours, returning to Stuff They Don't Want You to Know, conspiracy realist. Welcome, Scott Benjamin.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Hey, guys, just to break the fourth wall here for a moment, I'm an executive producer on this show, and we've been getting some reviews on iTunes that discuss how they can't believe this could ever be real, the stories that are put in here. And, you know, that's one of the big reasons we wanted to talk to Scott, to actually have just a conversation where we discuss what's actually affecting you and how real this truly is.
Yeah, let me tell you, everything that you hear on that show is real. It really is. It truly is. What happens to me, what happens in the horrific stories that we tell, it's all real. Too real.
No,
Yeah.
I've often said, Scott, in full disclosure, you and I worked on a show together for the better part of a decade.
Yeah.
I've often said about you, and I hope this doesn't offend you, that Scott Benjamin has 2 great fascinations, cars and crime.
Yeah, true.
And when we were hosting Car Stuff, one of the first How Stuff Works podcasts, people would be surprised, I think, how an occasional episode would morph into a true crime story, like the Dale car, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we'd love to kind of delve into some of the darker history of automobiles, and some of the lesser known corners of that. I guess that whole experience. What it was all about, and just kind of some surprising things that people had no idea were going on behind the scenes.
So for many people, Monster Presents Insomniac is a surprising turn, right? For people who've only known you through Car Stuff, for instance. Could you tell us a little bit about the inspiration for this series and give us a sense of what Insomniac is?
Sure. Can I first tell you, though, that this is a complete 90-degree turn for me, or 180-degree turn for me, really.
Speaking in car parlance,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I just am not one to really ever come forth with any kind of personal information, any kind of information that, lets the listeners really know a lot about my personal life. I mean, we kind of touch on some things that really aren't all that important, but when you're talking about your sleep and you're talking about kind of your mental well-being, that gets very personal very fast, and your relationship with your family, and how I interact with people here at work and all of that. So it's really, really personal story, and it's been tough for me along the way. But you asked about the inspiration for this, and the inspiration really goes back decades. I've been a true crime fan for probably 30 plus years, maybe 35, maybe even 40 years. I don't know. I can't remember when I began, but my father has always been into true crime, and he takes full responsibility for this, by the way, my addiction to this, because he has always been into, the same types of things that I have as far as reading, and I picked it up from him, grabbing some old books off the shelf, that he'd allow me to borrow or something, and just kind of reading through whatever he had. And then, eventually I started reading this stuff on my own when I had some free time. I'd do it, on vacation. I'd do it on an airplane, or, reading at night before going to bed or something. And it was always kind of fun. It was a way to pass time. And I never really internalized it the way that I have in the past several years, I guess.
I wanted to ask you about that. You said your dad, a lot of times in the show, you talk about how your dad would write in the margins of a lot of the books and try and solve the crimes.
Yeah.
And we kind of got into a little bit of why people are so into true crime, or what that fascination is. What would you say that is?
Oh, gosh. I think that it's just because it's so much more fascinating than fiction. It always has been to me. And I think the true crime readers will agree that you can't make something up that's better than a true story. I mean, when you really consider that this is really happening to someone, has happened to somebody, or you're able to see both sides of this whole thing, and you know that it really happened. You can look up court documents or police documents that back everything up and say, like, oh my gosh, this really happened this way, and it's far. And I'll say greater, and if I say greater or better or anything like that, I don't mean it in any offensive way. When you're talking about the death of somebody, that's awful. Mm-hmm. But this does seem like these are greater stories than fiction.
I've always thought that something might have to do with the fact that people like to feel better by comparison, where it's like, at least my life's not this screwed up, or at least, I'm not this, psychopathic serial killer. Or whatever,
absolutely. Yeah, it does, in a horrific way, a horrible way, it makes you feel better about yourself. You're right. Mm-hmm. In that, at least this isn't happening. Maybe what I'm dealing with right now isn't so bad. I can get through this.
When we talk about these kinds of stories on Stuff They Don't Want You to Know, plenty. But the ones that are in your show are a little more off the beaten path. They're kind of some you maybe haven't heard of, but are just as horrific as, say, like a Jeffrey Dahmer situation.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what we were going for in this. And I knew right from the very beginning when I wanted to do a true crime show years and years ago, I knew that I wanted to tackle some of the ones that have really gotten much, much less press than anybody else, any of the other stories. So, you can go anywhere and hear about Gacy and Dahmer and, Ed Kemper and all those guys. And they're fantastic stories, but you've pretty much heard just about everything you can about these people at this point. There's, relatively few little bits and pieces that you can dig up that are kind of new to you. Mm-hmm. With these stories, hopefully most of it, if not all of it, is brand new to the listener. And I think you'll find that they're equally as awful at the same time entertaining and just kind of intriguing as you go through and you listen to each of these stories, which are they're told in 2 parts each one, and it's a 10-episode series. And I don't know. I think that you're going to find some surprises in here, some real surprises. And I don't necessarily keep it PG-13. It delves into R-rated territory pretty quick. Mm-hmm. So I don't think this one's exactly for young listeners, but I'll leave that up to everybody out there.
Again, when did you start reading the true crime books, right? So we're drawing in several threads here. One thing that's fascinating about true crime is that crime itself often becomes an inherent conspiracy, right? We conspire to rob a bank. We conspire to kidnap or murder. Not the 4 or 5 of us, but you get the point. Let's before we delve into some of the specifics, because there is one case that I know Matt and Noel are very, very taken with now. Before we dive into the specifics, let's talk a little bit about Insomnia itself, because Insomniac does address something that you touched on earlier. It's something that doesn't get talked about very often in the world of true crime, which is the effect the shows can have on the people creating them. And it's always sort of a joke behind the scenes here when at How Stuff Works we say, don't take your work home with you. Everybody does to some degree. So when did you start Well, first, what is insomnia, and when did you start experiencing it? Was it in the course of creating this show?
It really was in the course of the show, and I think I've kind of pinned down exactly what triggered this in me, and I'll tell you about that as we get to it. But I've had some awful sleepless nights, and it goes on for days at a time sometimes. Where it's not where you're awake continuously for 96 hours or something like that. It's like where you might be awake for 40 hours at a time and then get 2 hours of rest and then have to function for a full work day and get home somehow. And then, you get 2-3 hours of rest again and then you're back again at work. And it just kind of goes on and on and on like that. And you never feel like you can catch up. And what that leads to is that, during the day, you fall asleep at your desk, in inopportune times. You feel drowsy when you're not supposed to. You feel wide awake when you're not supposed to be awake. Your sleep cycle is just completely off. It's just there's no way to shut down your mind at night. There's no way to turn off the thoughts, and it's just kind of this continuous stream of worry and panic and paranoia and fear and all this all these thoughts are just going through your head, and you cannot stop it. There's just no way to get around it, and it's miserable.
And I believe science is still trying to figure out the specifics of what causes insomnia, because there are different roots to the same condition, correct?
Sure. Yeah, exactly right. And one other thing that I have been, I guess I'll say, plagued with during this whole thing is that when I did fall asleep, I was having these horrific nightmares. And these nightmares were extremely realistic and really, really vivid dreams that were making me think that during the day, whatever I had dreamt the night prior had really happened. So, if I was part of, the cover-up of some awful crime or something like that, I felt guilty the next day. Or if I was, the one committing that crime, I felt even worse. And, there was just also some incredible scenes where, I'm in this world where I could tell you every single detail about every single little thing. And it wasn't like a typical dream where, like my previous dreams, I guess, years prior, where they're a little vague, little fuzzy around the edges. These are crystal clear dreams. I know everything about them. I know all the characters in them. I know everything about it. I can remember it the next day. It's terrifying the next day, especially if you're involved. The worst case would be, I'm involved in a crime and somehow in this dream, whatever, there's a dead body. And I'm helping to hide this dead body. And you can imagine the guilt and the fear and the anxiety and the paranoia and all that goes along with something like that. I've never done anything like that in my life, obviously.
Okay, sure.
I'm telling you, I've never done anything like that in my life. For real. Thanks, Ben. No, but really, I never have, and I never hope to, of course. But you get that awful, just gut-wrenching feeling that you can't look anybody straight in the eye because you feel so guilty about whatever you've done in your dream. And I know people have other dreams that are, maybe sex dreams. Maybe they're, just dreams that you've done something wrong at work or you've done something wrong at home or, something else like that. But these that involve, the death of another person, oh man, it's rough. It's really rough.
I got to tell you, Scott, I've had some recurring dreams like that too, where I've murdered a family friend, and I wake up and I feel as though I've done it, and that they're on to me, and that they're gonna know. Everyone's gonna know. I'm gonna be found out.
I almost, I know exactly what you're talking about. I had no idea that you're going through that too, by the way. But
this is years ago. It hasn't been in a while, but that's a very distinct memory for me, is having that dream and feeling instant guilt when I woke up.
Is it not true that you almost have to contact that person or look up that person in some way and reassure yourself that they're still around?
Maybe.
I had that kind of sensation too. How am I going to reassure myself that this was a dream and it wasn't real? Because it's that vivid, it's that realistic when it happens.
We're talking here about the edges of our consciousness. I mean, this is hitting on a ton of big issues, like what truly is consciousness, what truly is a dream. I mean, I know it sounds a little silly to go that big with it, but it really does surround all of these things, because how do we know for sure if we're having that vivid of a dream that it is a dream?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's just the nature of them themselves, of sleeping and dreaming. Man, I want to bring up things like The Matrix. I want to bring up things like
Plato's Cavern.
Yeah, exactly. Just knowing who we are, where we are, when we are, having that sense. And when you're going through a fugue state of having almost no sleep, I can totally imagine exactly I can't imagine what you're going through, Scott, but I can imagine what that would be like.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier what may have triggered some of these, and I think I kind of have it narrowed down to I had 4 family deaths that were people that were pretty close to me within a pretty short amount of time. An aunt, both my grandparents on my dad's side, and my mother passed away, and it was during that time that these dreams became the realistic dreams that they were, I guess. And reading true crime kind of took a different turn. I wasn't able to disassociate myself with what I was reading so much as more like I had more empathy, I guess, for the families and the victims themselves, and kind of understood a little bit more of what a deep loss like that meant to them. And I don't know, maybe there was something there. Maybe that's what did it, but it seems to kind of time out with those losses. And, oddly enough, I'll tell you, I lost 2 family pets along the way at the same time. And that alone is hard enough because, you're talking about pets that you've had for 15, 16 years at a time. And that's tough on somebody as well. But when you lose these people that are really close to you, and you combine that with having to kind of immerse yourself in these gritty, awful, dirty crimes that we're talking about here, because it is something I had to immerse myself in. It was work. I had to do this all day long, think about it at night, and come back in and do it all day long again. And it did just kind of wear on me.
Yeah. Well, I'd just like to relate this back to kind of us and the show really fast. I know we've all dealt with our own sleeplessness at times, what would generally be considered acute insomnia. It sounds like what you're dealing with is what would be considered chronic insomnia. It's lasted for months now at this point, right? Or if not longer than that. It
seems like maybe years at this point in some form or another. I mean, I have had broken sleep where, I can't sleep for more than an hour at a time without waking up, and then staying awake for half an hour at a time. And there's a lot of variations to what I'm going through right now with sleep. Yeah.
Well, for it to be considered chronic insomnia, it only has to happen 3 nights a week, out of a week.
Oh, it's chronic for sure then.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow. That's intense.
And it's ongoing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's lasted a long, long time. Like I said, probably I want to say maybe even a couple of years at this point. It's been pretty insane.
I just wanted to relate it back to, I think a lot of us listening, myself personally, can at least identify with what would be considered acute insomnia, where like for maybe a couple of days in a row, you don't get much sleep at all and you feel differently, or you're having trouble concentrating, or you're feeling really drowsy. Probably a lot of us who have been to college or just been in school ever have felt that during, midday in a class or something. I'm assuming, I'm just speaking from my own experience. But I wonder how many people out there listening have dealt with something along the lines of what Scott is describing. Mm-hmm. And we would very much like to hear from you if you've ever experienced just sleeplessness of that length, basically. Because I can only imagine that has a way, and this is me speaking not from experience, but just I can imagine that it has a way of amplifying whatever it is that you're feeling in the moment or whatever you're going through. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it does. Yeah, absolutely.
I have a few insomnia facts that I'm sure you're well aware of, Scott, but this may help some of our fellow listeners. Approximately 1 in 4 Americans will develop insomnia this year. Wow. About 30% of adults have symptoms of insomnia. 10% have chronic insomnia. And it appears that for a number of factors, or due to a number of factors, insomnia in this country is on the rise. And that may just be the age of spontaneity and instant information. But we're not built to live in this society.
Well, we're also just such a mile-a-minute society where everything's about maximizing your time and, not taking time for yourself, and everyone's like overstressed and overworked and not doing that self-care stuff. And a big part of the, self-care is like getting an appropriate amount of sleep.
I can tell you what it's like, laying in bed at night. with all these thoughts running through your head. I can almost tell you exactly where to go to like kind of understand what this is all about. And I don't remember the name of this movie, but it was Nicolas Cage, and he played a weatherman in this movie.
The Weatherman?
I don't think it was it called The Weatherman? It might have been. I don't think it was.
I think it was, actually.
Was it really? Okay. Well, he had there were moments where you were kind of in his head and you could hear the stream of consciousness, and it was just these it seemed like insane thoughts that were just all over the board. They were all over. He's thinking about his kid. He's thinking about his job. He's thinking about his relationship with his dad. He's thinking about his daughter. He's thinking about everything. And that is exactly what it's like. It's just thought after thought after thought. You can't shut it down. You can't stop it. You can't, just turn it all off and go to sleep and get that rest that you need, and then worry about it the next day. It's like it's there now, and you've got to deal with it.
I wasn't meaning to imply that like we're not taking care of ourselves because like insomnia is a choice. I think it's sort of like a product of maybe not having the ability to like kind of have a little time of peace that's just for yourself. All those thoughts are just whirring through your mind at all time because you don't give yourself space, or our society doesn't give ourselves space to just kind of slow down for a minute. Everything's like a mile a minute. And if you're a family man, you go from work to being at home and taking care of all of that stuff. And there's just so many things that are coming at you at all times. It's really hard to, quiet those thoughts.
Yeah, a lot of people will recommend, meditation or, breathing exercises or, this mantra that you can use in your head, at night just to kind of calm down, and even techniques. I was given techniques by a psychologist recently that were techniques that were given to military members, if they're POWs, and how they get to sleep, because it's critical that they actually get to sleep if they're a POW, because they'll start becoming kind of almost insane if they go without sleep for long, long periods of time. And of course, it'd be easy to not sleep in that situation. You'd be so worried or so upset or hurt or whatever. And there's certain things that you can chant to yourself over and over again in your head that allow you to get to sleep and kind of shut it all down, and then kind of be fresh and be alert and kind of understand. For them, not to cough up all the secrets that you know. Whereas if you were deprived of sleep, you might start talking, and that's one of the tactics that I've been taught, and it didn't really work for me. None of the breathing has worked for me. The meditation, I just can't seem to get into the right mindset to do it.
And speaking of taking moments, giving oneself cognitive space, let's pause for a quick word from our sponsor, and we'll be back with more from Scott Benjamin. And we have returned. So it sounds like one of the things that can lead to insomnia would be the persistent, unwelcome thoughts circling around like fish in a fishbowl, right?
Yeah.
This reminds me a little bit of the idea of the earworm, having a snatch of song stuck in your head. And for many people, one of the ways to cure that thought or to break that curse of the earworm is to go through the entire song, to confront that which is sort of a thorn in the side of our brain. Mantras have been used with various results, person to person. It's interesting that you said this one didn't quite do the job for you. And I think we talked off air during the break about this. I think we're dying to know, if you're comfortable, what is the mantra?
It is so simple. This is the most simple thing you can imagine. It's simply the words "don't think," and you repeat the words "don't think" over and over and over in your head. And if you're concentrating on thinking "don't think," you're not thinking about other things, and you're just thinking about "don't think," and you say that over and over and over again in your head until you finally fall asleep. And I guess it works, but I just haven't been able to get past several times of saying "don't think," and then I'm back to thinking about what I was thinking about before.
And it's like semantic satiation, right? When you say the words over and over in your head, they begin to lose meaning.
Yeah, exactly right. And the breathing exercises, they just haven't worked for me either. It's like the counting the seconds that you've inhaled and the seconds that you exhale and all that. It's supposedly the 4 count is the magic number for a lot of people, and inhale for 4 and hold it, and exhale for 4 and hold it, and it just doesn't work for me. I just haven't been able to have much success with that.
Wow. Well, I want to get into something Ben mentioned there, and that idea and process of curing yourself of an earworm, because I think that relates a lot to the motivations behind making this show Monster Presents Insomniac in the first place. Like, why on earth, if you are having nightmares and sleeplessness due to these monsters, these killers, would you continue making the podcast about these guys?
Well, it kind of came about at the same time. I mean, I guess they just sort of developed around the same time when I began doing the research for this podcast. And I didn't really have much trouble with it before, but then when I started to really, really dig deep into some of these characters that we're going to talk about, that's when the nightmares really kind of escalated, I suppose, and really got worse. And I wouldn't torture myself this way. And I know that, the management here doesn't want me to, be sleepless all the time. And, also, feels like I'm, again, they don't want to seem like they're making me do this and making my home life miserable or anything like that. But that's just kind of what's happened along the way. And I'm trying to pull myself out of that right now. And I think I'm getting there, but I'm not there yet.
So I guess my question is, Scott Benjamin, are you being forced to make this show against your will?
No, I'm not. I still enjoy, the true crime stuff. It has kind of taken a twist to where it's not, the fun leisure time activity that it was. But I do enjoy still reading it. I still, at my desk, you'll still see me looking up some kind of bad stuff and some interesting characters, let's put it that way, that, not the ones we're going to talk about now, but maybe even a whole new set. Maybe we'll see what happens there.
Okay, so let the record show Matt Frederick did not single-handedly force Scott Benjamin to make this very difficult show.
Yeah, well, we also have the cameras with the new eye tracking technology that we've been using, and they can discern that he was, in fact, telling the truth.
I am telling the truth.
You definitely didn't single-handedly force Scott to do anything because, as people know, your street name is Matty Two Hands Frederick.
Yeah, it was double-handedly for sure, if it was, right?
So maybe
Thanks, man.
let's dive in. Let's chase some of these shadows. Let's walk a little further away from the light here and see some of the cases that have, I don't want to say inspired your insomnia, but have been in lockstep with this condition. One that Matt, you Noel had mentioned before was the case of a fellow named Stephen Mark McDaniel.
Sure, yeah. That's
AKA the creepy neighbor.
Yeah, yes, very creepy neighbor. And he's kind of a standout on this list. He's a guy that I don't think he's not a serial killer. He's a person who killed one individual, but he was somebody that myself included, but the authorities believe that this guy would have been a serial killer had he been able to continue. He was just really bad at what he did, and he got caught early on. But there's some incredibly disturbing things about this character that will come up in the podcast, and lots of detail that it's hard to overlook some of these signs that he was well on his way to becoming a lifetime criminal.
Now, he was a law student at some point, right?
He was, as was his victim. They were at Mercer Law School in Macon, Georgia, and they were I don't know if they were necessarily in class together or not. They were in the same graduating class. They had attended university together and knew of each other. Him, obviously, a little bit more than her. He was infatuated with her. She knew very little of him. And they lived near each other in the same apartment complex. They were next-door neighbors. And he had an unhealthy obsession with her, I guess. That's probably the best way to put it. And she really didn't understand that, didn't know it until it was far too late.
And one of the craziest things about this is how the public learned about it. Specifically, the local population in Macon, Georgia. It was a local TV station that they were conducting interviews outside of the apartment complex where was it? Where Stephen and Lauren lived.
Correct.
And Stephen happened to be walking near them or something and agreed to do an interview.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. She the reporter grabbed Stephen and that's the thing. I've got a theory about that I'll come to in just a moment, but she grabbed him and had him do a quick interview, and he looks all disheveled and a little bit wild-eyed, and his hair is kind of crazy, and he's just an unusual looking guy to begin with. You'll understand what I mean if you see him. And he gives this interview, which when you're looking back is like the worst acting job you've ever seen in your life. When you really, investigate what happened and understand what was going on right at that moment. This is just one key element of the story, and I guess maybe a bit of a plot twist in it is that during the interview, the reporter mentions to him that they have located a body on the property or nearby.
I remember this, yeah.
And he immediately just goes quiet, goes completely catatonic and stares at the lens of the camera and can't believe what's going on and says, kind of stammers, a body, like he can't believe it. And then he kind of staggers away from the camera, sits down for a while, says he needs to sit down and rest. And, they're trying to comfort him, trying to console him because he, up until this point, had been involved in the supposed search for Lauren's body, even though he knew exactly where she was. He knew exactly what had happened to her. It's really a remarkable piece of footage. And they do bring him back on the camera later and have him talk. And, he's supposedly really upset and, he's crying these crocodile tears, how concerned he is over what's going on and, how he was so close to Lauren and how, everybody loved her. I can't imagine what happened. Somebody must have, snatched her in the park when she's out for a jog or something like that. He's just beside himself with fear and worry and, anger about this. But all along, it's pretty evident what's really happening.
But I mean, geez, like for someone who reacted so poorly, like why do you think he would have put himself out there like that? Well, you think he was just kind of cocky and like didn't think he was going to get caught or that he had like done the perfect crime or something?
So this is my theory, and I mentioned this just a moment ago, but I truly feel like Stephen kind of put himself in a position to be interviewed, to get himself on camera and to be able to kind of say like, hey, I don't know what's going on. I'm just a neighbor and, I'm clear of this whole thing. He thought he was in the clear. And a lot of these guys, just about every case that you'll read about of serial killers or killers like this, like Stephen McDaniel, you'll find that they have this narcissistic tendency where they feel like they're a lot smarter than everybody else, and It's like this is his moment to kind of stand right there where the crime happened, right in front of where the crime happened, and say to everybody else, you idiots aren't looking in the right spot. I know exactly where she is, and I'm just going to lie to you right to your face and tell you exactly what's going. What I want you to think, and you're going to take it and kind of believe it. I feel like this is like just kind of like the ultimate, like I'll show you move from a killer, and we've seen this before with other killers. And in fact, another one in this series does something similar, like another really odd on-camera interview with the local news station. And again, I feel like it's just that narcissistic tendency for these guys to say, I'm a lot smarter than you and you're just not looking in the right spot. I could tell you where they are. I'm not going to.
Can we just mention who that is?
It's yeah, definitely. It's the first couple of stories that we're going to talk about in Insomniac, and it's Herb Baumeister. Herb Baumeister was interviewed by a local Indianapolis television station right on the very property where all of his bodies were buried. And he's doing it, right at the base of his driveway with his property in the background. And he's talking about some, an animal that was striped over on the road. Road crew ran over a raccoon with a striping machine. And he's just outraged over the treatment of this poor little animal. But, right behind him are the dead bodies of all these young men that he had been killing on his property. So it's a bizarre interview, but he gives no outward appearance of being anything other than just a typical, small businessman. Mm-hmm. And he's very concerned about what's happening there in his community. And it's just a bizarre interview.
Chilling, right?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, when you consider what was happening at the time in that individual's life, and in particular, right on that property, right where the camera crew was, he's got the ultimate secret right there behind him, and he's just not letting anybody through that. He's got that hard veneer that he's not letting anybody look beyond.
And Baumeister had quite a body count, right? There was still he's passed away now. I don't want to spoil the means of his death, but he is no longer on the planet in corporeal form, and he is still being linked to more murders, I believe, through the 80s and the 90s.
Yeah, I believe so. Well, they tied him to some stranglings that happened on I-70 prior to him owning the home where he was interviewed, where we're talking about this interview happening. And what happens is the victims are all the same age, the same weight, the same demographic basically as the ones that he killed on his property. But as soon as he bought this home, the highway killings stopped and his killings began. And so it's very, very likely that, his victim count was officially, I think, 11, what he's convicted of. They believe that it went as high as 20 or possibly more, if they can tie him to all of the others that they didn't have any kind of physical evidence, for.
Isn't it terrible how when we speak of these things, we're talking about body count, as the number of victims. When you're thinking about some of these most notorious serial killers, and it's their body count a lot of times is one of those things that becomes the number, the stat that people look for to like how prolific they were or whatever.
Yeah, it's awful, isn't it?
But just the fact that 11 people lost their lives because of this guy, at least.
And that's 11 families. And, the number of people affected by that, it grows exponentially.
Yeah.
There's somebody that cared about that person. There's somebody, lots of people probably that cared about that person, friends, family, associates, whatever it happens to be. Somebody raised that person, to the point where they were killed. And all of the effort and the time and the love and, the care that went into raising that person and being close to that person, all that's just taken away for a senseless reason so quickly. And so just, again, senselessly. There's no reason for this other than, one person's selfishness, one person's, desire to, just to, I guess, be lawless. I don't know how better to put this than, it's just they're succumbing to their urges and it's horrific.
So what circumstances led to Baumeister's apprehension? How did they find him?
They found it's kind of a twisted story, and it's probably one of the first few things you're going to hear in episode 1, where he's kind of tracked down to an area in Canada, and they discover his body really. Because he knew he had been found out. He knew that he was being tracked at that time. He had gotten early word when he was in a different part of Indiana. He was visiting his mother at the time in northern Indiana and had fled from there, understanding what was going on in Indianapolis at his home. He knew that the time was up for him, and he began to run. And he realized at some point, I'm not going to be able to outrun this. I'm not going to be able to ever go back to the life that I had. I can't live like this. So he decided to take care of himself, I guess, if you want to put it that way. And he never ever, as a lot of these guys do, he never accepted blame for any of these murders. He never mentioned any of the murders really in his suicide note. But it's kind of shocking how you would think that it would be your time to come clean and just clear your conscience that one last time. But he never ever admitted to any of it.
Mm-hmm. And perhaps in a very real way, he compartmentalized his killing persona and his day-to-day Herb Baumeister persona.
Oh, I believe that completely. I think it's two separate individuals. I mean, it's a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde thing, where, I believe that there were times when he felt it was safe for him to do this or it was the right thing for him to do. And other times when, he had to play the part of the businessman, the family man, and kind of keep it all together on the surface for the community and for, his own reputation. Although there were a lot of cracks in that reputation. He found that, there were a lot of troubles along the way, I guess, for Herb. But, hit and run accidents and, speeding tickets, and he was drinking a lot at work and stuff like that. It was just there's a lot of trouble.
A lot of flags.
Yeah,
huh?
Exactly right. And more than that even, but he seemed to get around it, and he seemed to, like you said, compartmentalize it, I think, in a way that worked for him.
Let's pause for a moment here. We'll have a word from our sponsor, and then we will return with more Insomniac. And we have returned. We should say that we're giving these cases a high-level look to give you a taste of what we're exploring in Insomniac, but the episodes themselves are very deep dives. Would you say that's accurate, Scott?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we're not giving anything away here. I know we're kind of revealing a few little secrets here and there, but there's so much more to each one of these stories. Like no matter how much we reveal here, there's going to be so much more revealed in those episodes.
Well, let's take a look at least one more person of interest. Could you tell us a little bit about Arthur Shawcross? This person was unfamiliar to me, which is surprising sometimes.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You know a lot of criminals, Ben. I don't mean to sound that way. I mean, you know a lot about true crime.
Do.
You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm kind of surprised, but this is the Rochester Strangler. This is a guy that. He had an interesting criminal career, I guess, because it was broken up by a couple of decades, really.
Right, he went dormant, right?
Yeah, well, he wasn't necessarily dormant as much as he was incarcerated.
Boy.
He served his time for some horrific crimes, of course, in Rochester. He then was put in jail for, I believe it was like 15 years or something like that. He should have been in prison probably for the rest of his life for what he had done. I'm not going to tell you what he did, but he should have been in jail for the rest of his life. He was let out early and went almost immediately right back to killing again. But he had a completely different set of victims, a different type of victims that he was after at that point. So his crimes span from the early 1970s all the way to about 1989. The second set actually goes from, I don't know when, probably I want to say like the maybe early 80s until about 1989. And the victim count, as we've already talked about this horrific victim count thing.
Sure.
It could have been stopped at 2. I'll put it that. And after he was released, he killed an additional 12 people. So, that just shows you what a mistake it was to let this guy out. And some of the things that he did were just horrific. I mean, some of the details are the stuff of nightmares and were the stuff of nightmares for me for a while. But yeah, some really, really bad things going on. I mean, he claimed he was also kind of a liar and a bragger, and he embellished a lot of his crimes. But what he truly did, what they discovered that he did, was nearly as bad as his own fantasy world that he lived in.
We talked about the previous two guys that found a way to insert themselves onto television to almost as a wink and a nod of like, here I am, you'll never catch me. Mm-hmm. There's something with this character, Shawcross, that he did where I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he frequented a bar that was kind of known as a police hangout.
Actually, it was Dunkin' Donuts. He
went
to Dunkin' Donuts. I think you're thinking of Edmund Kemper went to a bar that was so this is not uncommon. I mean, this happens with other criminals as well. They want to get kind of the inside track on what the police are up to. So
Dunkin' Donuts is where you get that. Just saying.
Well, it's a funny stereotype, I know, but it's true. He found the Dunkin' Donuts that was near his home where the police were hanging out, and these guys would go into the Dunkin' Donuts and they would kind of discuss what they were dealing with, what they were kind of openly. Once they were familiar with the regulars that would come in, at which Shawcross was one, he would just kind of sit at the counter and listen to what they were doing, and he would talk with them occasionally, but he didn't really insert himself into the conversation quite as much. He would just listen to what's happening, and by playing this kind of cat and mouse game with them, as a lot of these guys do, he was able to function in the way that he wanted to longer than he normally would have, because he had the inside scoop on what they were up to and what they were going to do, the stings that they were going to set up to try to capture him, where they were going to be that day to kind of look, if they're going to be down by the river, if they're going to be at the playground, whatever they were going to be doing, to look for this guy. He knew he had the inside scoop, and Edmund Kemper did a similar thing at a bar, and I think it was called the Jury Room. It was across from the courthouse, and he befriended police as well, and same type of thing. And when it came right down to it, Edmund Kemper, when he actually he's trying to confess at some point, and he called the police, and they didn't even believe him. He had to call several times and give them very accurate information about what he had done in order to convince them that he was the one guilty of this. He was responsible.
Also, he's anomalous in that he does have a higher IQ. A lot of these killers tend to be lower in the intelligence spectrum, right?
Yeah.
So Kemper has that chilling interview upon which the series Mindhunter has based more than a few episodes, wherein he describes in first person his motivations.
And here's Shawcross. Shawcross is I would call him one of the, I guess, lower IQ, lower than Kemper at least. And he was smart enough though to understand where he needed to be and what the information that he needed to gather in order to continue to again function the way that he was functioning at that time. And it just allowed him to continue to do what he wanted to do.
So we touched on something briefly that I think bears further examination here, and that is the idea of the survivors, the relatives, the loved ones of the victims. For those people, as anyone who has been involved in a tragedy like this is well aware, for those people, the murder never really stops happening, right? Mm-hmm. And we can be stuck in that moment the same way you can be stuck hearing the same segment of a song or telling yourself, don't think, don't think, don't think. What have you learned about the way at least U.S. society treats the loved ones, the survivors of these tragedies? Do you think that there is any sand to the idea that this country may glorify serial killers?
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, I think that that's the case. It's been the case in the past. I think that they're getting a lot better at this now. I think some of these mass shooters that we hear about recently, some of the ones that kill everybody all at once, in one day, not a serial killer necessarily. But some of the news outlets are trying to avoid using the name of the person, trying to give them a little less fame for what they've done, because I think a lot of people are you've probably heard this. They're trying to kind of outdo each other, and that's a horrific game that they're playing. I think they're maybe doing a little bit less of that when it comes to capturing like the Golden State Killer, or capturing serial killers that are maybe local that we don't hear about nationwide rather. You'll probably hear their names in the papers still, and I think they're doing a better job of it. I think that they're trying to minimize that so that they're not glorified the way they were. As far as like the treatment that the families receive, I think there's still a lot of compassion that's given to the families of the victims by the police, by supporting members of the force, the psychologists or whoever happens to come in and have to like kind of talk the kids through this thing. And I don't know, maybe I'm talking myself into a corner here, but no, I feel like there's still a lot of compassion for the people that have to go through this, that are the victims' families, but maybe they're definitely not glorifying the killer quite as much as they have been in the last couple of decades.
Right, because especially in the 80s and 90s, there was this huge phase of that. Yeah. And in some ways, it could be seen as a successor to the earlier cultural practice of glorifying other criminals, right? Mm-hmm. Like Bonnie and Clyde, for instance, right?
It reminds me of a most wanted list or something that's plastered all over town or something to that effect, where everybody in town knows the face of those bad people that we're chasing. Right.
That's it's a very good point. It's one that we have to address. I don't know whether there is an answer, because it's also important to be aware of this. This is more horrible than horror fiction, and it's important to be armed with this information. One thing, and stop me if this is too far into spoiler territory, but one thing I'm very curious about, Scott, is did you find, or have you found in the course of your research, something that completely surprised you, or if you had to pick one or two moments that sort of stayed with you, more so than, I hate to say typical, but the regular stuff that stayed with you?
Yeah.
Was there anything that just caught you flat-footed?
Well, there are a couple of things. Yeah, I can point to a couple of things. And one I'm not going to give you too much detail on because it's the end of the series and I don't want to really reveal where we're going with this whole thing. But gosh, there are a few things. One was that one of the characters that we're going to talk about in this series is his name is Donald Henry Pee Wee Gaskins Jr., and he goes by Pee Wee. It's a funny name, I know, but this guy is bad. He's bad. I mean, really bad guy. And he was known as the meanest man in America at one point, and there's very, very good reason for that. He wrote a book that was called The Final Truth. He wrote it himself. He actually had a ghostwriter, somebody who came in and sat down with him on death row, and he just kind of let it all out. I mean, he knew he was going to be executed. He knew that, this was it. It was him coming clean for all of his crimes, everything bad that he did. It was all like, this is all real stuff. It was all, proven at some point. Now, of course, I think there's a little bit of embellishment because that's the way these guys operate. There's a little bit, but the killings themselves, the ones that he is guilty of, he fesses up to in great detail and tells you exactly what happened in pretty good detail. I mean, real detail, serious detail, probably more than you would want to know. I've read the whole book, and it was pretty shocking. The only one that I can think of that comes even close to this is another one that was written by another killer. His last name was Schaefer, Gerard Schaefer, I think is his name. And in that book, he describes – it was called Killer Fiction. And he played it off as fiction, but I don't think much of that book was fiction. I think a lot of it was based on his crimes, or at least his fantasies of the crimes that he did commit. So there's a lot of parallels to what he really had done in his real life. And those two books are probably about the only two that have really kind of disturbed me to the point, like far beyond any other true crime book that I've ever read. And the other thing that has kind of stuck with me is the very last person that we're going to talk about in this whole series. And there's a reason this guy was put off to the end. He's the one that I found the most disturbing. His name's Dean Corll. He's called the Candyman. And Dean was unique in a way that he had two teenage accomplices that helped him with his murders. And the way that they went about this, the coldness, the callousness, the depravity that they showed throughout this whole thing, it's far beyond any other criminal that I've ever read about. He's probably one of the worst people that I've ever read about in my whole life. And I've read many, many true crime books and know of a lot of the typical or the more common killers that most of us have probably heard of.
Sure.
But this one, this story goes above and beyond. It's horrific.
Just to jump in there, I remember the first time I listened to the last two episodes in early cuts, and I kept turning it off because I could not listen to it.
Yeah, it's shocking the way that he had command of these two teenage accomplices and what they did for him and with him, and you're going to find it pretty disturbing. Let's just put it that way.
Honestly, Scott, when I think about that case and those episodes, it gives me a better understanding of why and how something like this could affect you if you have just an ounce of empathy,
Yeah.
Like seeing through the eyes of some of those victims just enough. I can imagine how it would bring about nightmares and anxieties and fears and all of that. I can see it.
We see that's the thing is that, prior to all of this, I didn't really come at it with that sense of empathy. And I've kind of developed that over, the last several years, and more so, probably because of what I've been going through in my own personal life. And it does affect you differently. So, I don't mean to sound whiny about any of this or anything like that. It's just that's just the way that things have kind of progressed for me. And I'm trying to get away from that. I'm trying to, I guess shut that off a little bit more and trying to it's awful to say, but become a little bit more hardened again against this type of thing, because I do enjoy reading this stuff. It's interesting to me still, but coming from that point with that empathy, that does make it a lot more difficult. And until you have that sensation, that feeling, or that understanding, I don't know if you can really put yourself in that same or that similar situation, like maybe what the person next to you who's reading the same thing is going through. It's all different for everybody.
Well, and I think you made this pretty clear, but this condition that you're struggling with did develop like in tandem with you kind of developing the show, and it sort of became part of the show organically, where it just made sense. It wasn't like a clever pitch. It was literally, this is Scott's life. And I remember seeing you in the office a couple of times, and I actually had a month of pretty bad insomnia myself. We talked about it a couple of times.
Yeah, we did.
And that was actually when I first realized that you were having those troubles, because I told you about my troubles, and we were kind of sharing, ideas of like what to do about it or whatever.
And I think it was sometime around that same time when I kind of took an informal poll around the office with, who's having sleeping trouble. And I think a lot of people did. A lot of them said, I don't sleep more than 3-4 hours a night most nights, and I have a lot of worry about work and about personal things or whatever. And not to get anybody's personal business or anything, but a lot of people are having sleep issues around here. I mean, most of the people in the office are, and I would bet if this is just kind of a microcosm of what's going on everywhere else, most people are doing, are having some issues with sleep. Whether it's something kind of minor or it's something a little tougher, something that really causes some problems, at home and at work. And I bet a lot of people are going through that.
How would you say the Insomniac components of the show, like there's sort of these discrete moments in the show where you talk about this. How would you say those kind of inform the bigger story? Or like, what do you want people to take away from that?
Well, I think actually, you know what? It's funny. It's a little bit. It's kind of separate in a way. I try to tell the story just so that it's just a story, so that it's this horrific true crime story, and it's something that you haven't heard before. But then my own personal part of this whole thing, it's just kind of like something that we've added here and there to kind of let people know, what's happening at the time. Like what I was feeling at the time, what I'm going through, and I'm trying to keep them separate, and I'm kind of like I'm trying to keep all this, the work stuff separate from my personal life, and it's a good, I don't know, it's a good analogy for that, I guess, is that trying to just kind of keep one thing here, one thing there, and keep them apart as much as I can, but they do come together to form this whole story, and this, that's part of who I am right now at this moment, and I guess you're getting to see a glimpse of that. You're getting to see, what that's all about. The melding of these two things.
You certainly look like Scott Benjamin that I remember from Car Stuff and the guy who portrayed the Zodiac. Wait a second, did you become the Zodiac Killer?
No.
Is that what this is about?
Absolutely not.
Oh, man.
Just the voice of.
Okay, all right.
Just the voice of.
I'll give you a little flavor of that. Yeah.
Well, the show is called Monster Presents Insomniac. It is available now wherever you find your favorite chilling podcast. Scott, thank you so much for coming by and hanging out with us today and giving us a firsthand exploration of this unique approach to true crime. And I've got to say, I appreciate it, but I am very worried for you.
Well, no need to worry, Ben. I'm kind of on the mend now. I'm getting better, slow but sure. I'm kind of figuring this sleep thing out a little bit, day by day, and I am getting better. So no worries there. I should be back to normal pretty soon here. I would think. I hope anyway. But I do want to thank all three of you, Ben, Matt, Noel, all of you for letting me come in here and share the space with you today. I really appreciate it, and I hope I haven't talked too much. It feels like I've been kind of taking over the show. I didn't mean to do that, but
this is that's what being a guest is all about. We're here to highlight your story and your show, and we love it, and we love you, Scott, always.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, and I have felt like people have been kind of compassionate about this, understanding of what I've been going through, and I hope other people out there that are suffering with the same type of thing have somebody that can kind of help them along with it too, and you can talk about it, you can figure it out, because you do have to figure it out. It will destroy you quickly.
And what are your personal experiences with insomnia? Are you one of those 25% of Americans who will acquire insomnia this year or already has? If so, how do you address it? How do you deal with it?
Do you think this is just something that we deal with now, the way our society is?
Right. Is it the new normal?
Yeah. Or is it something specific? Is there something going on specifically that we're all grappling with? Who knows?
Tell us about it. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We highly recommend our community page, Here's Where It Gets Crazy.
You can give us a phone call where we are 1-833-STDWYTK. Leave us a message. You might get on the air if you choose to get on there. Let us know if you do not want that, or if you don't want to be named. Any specifics, just leave it in that message. If you want to find us on social, you can find us on Instagram, where we're Conspiracy Stuff Show. And Ben, you are on there as well.
That's true. You can see me get kicked in and out of various countries, organizations, and restricted areas at Ben Bolin.
And secret societies?
No comment.
Okay.
And you can find me just, palling around with my kid, or doing a little travel, or cooking some delicious foods over at How Now Noel Brown.
And hey, that's enough about our show. How can people learn about Monster Presents Insomniac, Scott?
Well, they can go to insomniacpodcast.com, and that's probably the best place, really. But you can also get it at Apple Podcasts or the iHeartRadio app.
And if none of those methods of communication are really, really hitting the spot for you, we have good news. There is one way that you can always contact us. You can send us a good old-fashioned email. We are
conspiracy@iheartradio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio's How Stuff Works. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.